In the glittering skyline of Hong Kong, love often looked like a transaction, and few stories captured that illusion more painfully than the one between Lau Luen-hung and Li Chi-chi. To the public, they were the perfect match, a billionaire with limitless ambition and a woman who gave up everything to stand beside him. But one night, during an otherwise ordinary dinner, the phone rang, and what came through the receiver shattered everything she thought she knew. A voice on the other end hurled insults, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Her husband didn't defend her. He simply took the phone, spoke softly to the caller, and laughed. In that moment, the woman who had sold her home, her jewelry, and her future for love realized she had become invisible. What began as a fairy tale partnership built on trust and shared dreams slowly twisted into something colder, a test of control, loyalty, and pride. Behind the polished surface of Hong Kong's elite circles, whispers spread about why a man who spent millions refused to marry the woman who made him rich in spirit. Was it love, or a performance carefully directed by power? And in the background of it all stood a name few dared to mention, Bao Vin Kam, the man whose final act would make this breakup the most expensive and perhaps the most cruel in Hong Kong's history. Before the scandals, before the headlines, there was only a quiet kind of devotion. Li Chi-chi wasn't born into privilege. She came from a modest family, a girl who dreamed of building a future on her own terms. When she met Lau Luen-hung, he was already known in the business world as a young man with relentless drive and a streak of arrogance that could either charm or crush, depending on who stood before him. To him, Li represented something pure, a contrast to the gold-leafed facades of Hong Kong's upper class. She was not dazzlingly glamorous, but she was steadfast. She worked multiple jobs to fund her education overseas, often skipping meals so she could afford the next tuition payment. When Lau told her about his business ambitions, she didn't hesitate. She sold her jewelry, convinced her mother to sell the family home, and poured every cent into his startup dream. It was more than love, it was faith. Lau Luen-hung promised her a life together once his empire stood firm. "When we make it together," he told her, and she believed him. Their sacrifices paid off. Within a few years, Lau's company climbed the ladder of Hong Kong's financial elite. There were shares, investors, board meetings, and the glimmer of an upcoming IPO. When he rang the bell at the stock exchange, Li stood behind the cameras, proud but unseen, the invisible foundation of a man's success story. She believed that her patience, her loyalty, and her sacrifices were the down payment for a future as his wife. But what she didn't know was that with every dollar he earned, the balance of their relationship shifted. Money made Lau more powerful, more admired, and perhaps more dangerous. He began to treat promises like business deals, negotiable, revisable, and easy to abandon once the value had been extracted. Still, Li told herself it was temporary, that he would come back to the man who once whispered gratitude instead of numbers. As the wealth grew, so did the silence between them. Business dinners replaced family meals, and private moments were reduced to brief exchanges before another late-night meeting. The man who once depended on her now seemed to live above her, unreachable. Friends warned her that love built on imbalance always collapses, but she refused to believe them. To her, every sacrifice still meant something. To him, every sacrifice was already paid. The question lingered in her mind, like a storm she refused to see. If love is an investment, when does the dividend become a wedding? Success had a way of changing people, and for Lau Luen-hung, it was intoxicating. Once a man driven by hunger and vision, he now walked through Hong Kong's glittering nightlife as if the city itself belonged to him. Deals were struck over champagne, and loyalty was measured not in years, but in profit margins. His name began appearing in the financial pages, not just for his business achievements, but for the women rumored to orbit around him. For the first time, Li Qiqi found herself standing outside the room she once helped build. At first, she convinced herself it was just work, late meetings, new partnerships, opportunities that required him to network with people who mattered. But as the parties grew louder and the headlines bolder, she could no longer pretend. She had built him from the ground up, yet now he seemed to forget her name in public. And then came the phone call. Li was recovering from a serious illness when her phone rang. On the other end was Lau, distant, cold, impatient. When she told him she felt weak, he replied, "Why aren't you dead yet?" The words weren't just cruel, they were surgical, cutting through years of devotion in a single breath. Those who knew Lau at the time described him as brilliant but ruthless, a man whose success depended on control, and control demanded distance. According to accounts from people around them, Lau Luen-hung saw emotion as inefficiency, something that distracted him from the larger empire he was building. Li Qiqi, meanwhile, still believed that patience could save what was left of their love. She waited for apologies that never came, clung to the belief that the man she loved was simply lost inside his ambition. But the more she forgave, the more invisible she became. In the circles of Hong Kong's elite, her story became whispered gossip. Some called her loyal, others pitied her for not leaving sooner. Lau's new companions were younger, flashier, and came with headlines attached. He treated attention like currency, and women became another kind of investment, beautiful, temporary, and replaceable. For Li, each photograph that surfaced in the tabloids felt like a betrayal disguised as progress. The man who once promised her a shared future was now promising others the same dream, but with more glitter. She began to wonder whether love could survive under the shadow of power. In business, Lau demanded absolute control. In relationships, he seemed to demand the same. Money had rewritten the rules, and she no longer understood the game. Friends urged her to leave, but leaving meant walking away from everything she had built, not just a man, but a decade of belief. Still, somewhere beneath the humiliation, there was a realization forming. Love, when mixed with pride and wealth, becomes a contest no one wins. The devotion that once defined her now felt like debt, and debt, as Lau had taught her, always comes with interest. The question echoed in her head as she stared at the skyline that had once represented their shared dream. Was she his partner, or just a placeholder? The night began like any other, quiet, routine, harmless. Li Qiqi was setting the dinner table when the phone started to ring. At first, she didn't think much of it. In their house, business calls were constant, part of the background noise of being married to a man like Lau Luen-hung. But this call was different. The voice on the other end wasn't business. It was personal, loud, vulgar, and unmistakably female. The words hit like slaps through the receiver, insults so vicious that even the walls seemed to echo them. Li froze. Her husband looked up, his face turning from confusion to irritation, and then to something worse, indifference. When she handed him the phone, expecting him to end the humiliation, he didn't defend her. Instead, he spoke softly to the woman on the other end, laughed at something she said, and walked away. The moment was short, maybe a minute or two, but for Li, it felt like the collapse of an entire world. The man who once promised her forever had just confirmed that forever was negotiable. After that night, the silence between them became unbearable. Meals were eaten without words. Their once shared home felt like a hotel lobby. Reports from close friends said that Lau had begun staying out more, sometimes not returning until dawn, sometimes not at all. When he did come home, his warmth was replaced by criticism. Her appearance, her voice, her very presence seemed to annoy him. Li began to keep a small notebook where she wrote down every harsh word, every time he turned away. Reading it later, she realized the pattern wasn't random, it was systematic. Every act of affection was followed by punishment, every attempt to talk met with dismissal. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe he was stressed, maybe business pressure had changed him, but deep down, she knew what had really shifted: the power. He had it, she didn't. And in the world they lived in, power was everything. Those around them described Lau as magnetic but merciless, the kind of man who needed to dominate every space he entered. With Lee, he no longer needed to conquer. He already had. The chase was over, and the reward bored him. Her friends begged her to leave. One of them said, "He's not the man you built, he's the man your money helped create." But leaving was not that simple. She had invested too much: her youth, her pride, her identity. She wasn't just his partner, she was the proof that he had once been human. Still, the humiliation of that phone call replayed in her mind every night like a curse. It wasn't just betrayal, it was exposure. The whole city might not have heard the words, but in her heart, she knew Hong Kong's gossip mill would soon catch up. And so she made a decision, not out of anger, but out of survival. She stopped waiting for him to come home. She stopped asking where he was. She stopped pretending that the silence between them could still be called love. From the night that phone rang, Li Chi was no longer his wife in spirit. She was his witness, someone who had seen too much and stayed too long. And as the city's lights flickered outside their penthouse windows, she began to wonder, if love could humiliate you in public and abandon you in private, was it ever really love at all? When the tabloids first printed her name beside Lau Luen-hung's, Li Chi didn't react. She had seen enough rumors to know that money and gossip often shared the same bed. But what followed wasn't gossip, it was a pattern. Week after week, new faces appeared next to his in glossy photos. Actresses, models, and socialites, all smiling under the same chandelier light that once illuminated Lee. There was one name that surfaced more than others, a young rising favorite, a woman the press called the new obsession of Hong Kong's most desirable billionaire. Overnight, Lee's private humiliation became a public spectacle. Every magazine cover, every whisper at dinner parties, turned her marriage into a stage play where she was no longer invited to perform. In public, Lau maintained his usual composure, elegant, charming, the perfect gentleman. Behind closed doors, he laid out conditions that stripped away what little dignity she had left. If she wanted to stay, she would have to accept a new arrangement. No marriage, no children, and no questions. He told her that freedom was what modern relationships were built on, but what he really meant was control. She would remain nearby, in name only, while his new companions paraded through the social scene like trophies. The man who once told her she was irreplaceable now treated her presence as an inconvenience. To outsiders, she was the quiet ex who wouldn't let go. Few knew that it was Lau who refused to release her completely. He kept her close enough to remind himself of his own rise, a symbol of what he'd conquered, but never close enough to let her feel seen. It was power disguised as generosity. According to reports from that time, he even bought a mansion for one of his new lovers, the kind of extravagant gesture that once belonged to Lee alone. She read about it in the papers. The same headlines that once praised their shared empire now celebrated his new muse. For Lee, watching her life rewritten in headlines was a new kind of cruelty. Each article blurred the line between truth and theater, and she became a ghost haunting her own story. Friends described her as calm, even graceful, but those who truly knew her saw the quiet collapse behind her eyes. She stopped attending social events, stopped correcting the rumors, and began living in what she called a life without witnesses. Still, she never retaliated. She never sold her story, never sought pity, never tried to destroy him publicly. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe, as some speculated, she still loved the man she had built from nothing, but deep down, she knew what had to be done. One morning, she packed a single suitcase and walked out of the home they once shared. There was no fight, no farewell, just the faint echo of a door closing behind years of silence. As the car drove her away from the city, she looked out at the skyline that had once represented everything she believed in. The same skyline now shimmered like a mirage, a place built on money, illusion, and betrayal. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure whether she was escaping him or escaping herself. Either way, leaving wasn't freedom, it was survival. When people later looked back on the story of Lau Luen-hung and Li Chi-chi, they often spoke of one shadow that hung over both of them, Bao Vin Kam. He wasn't a man who sought headlines, but his influence was everywhere. To those who knew the couple, he was the silent architect, the one who had shaped their beginning and, in an indirect but devastating way, their end. According to accounts from people close to them, it was Bao's final demand, his last move, that sealed Li's fate long before she ever realized it. In the power circles of Hong Kong's elite, marriages were rarely about love. They were about strategy. And in a world where women were traded like leverage, Bao made sure Lau understood that some alliances were better kept open than closed. To marry Li, a woman of humble origins who had sacrificed everything yet held no family influence, was, in Bao's mind, a liability. It was the cruel logic of a system where affection was weakness and control was everything. So Lau followed the script. He distanced himself, staged a breakup that looked inevitable, and buried the past under layers of money and status. Li Chi-chi, unaware of how orchestrated her heartbreak truly was, carried the emotional wreckage alone. In 1992, she finalized her separation, taking only what she had earned with her own hands. For a while, she rebuilt quietly, new projects, new friends, a softer smile that suggested recovery. But beneath it all, the damage lingered. Years of humiliation, isolation, and betrayal had eaten away at her spirit. Then came the diagnosis: lung cancer, a final betrayal from her own body. Even in illness, she refused to speak ill of him. She told a close friend, "I loved him until there was nothing left of me to love." When she died at 49, the city barely noticed. The news was buried beneath financial reports and entertainment gossip. Lau Luen-hung, meanwhile, continued his climb, buying art, sponsoring galas, and appearing beside new faces, the picture of wealth untouched by consequence. But those who once saw him with Li said that something in his eyes had changed. There was a distance there, a hollowness that no amount of gold could fill. Money had given him everything, except peace. In the end, Bao's last move didn't just separate two people, it defined them. Li became a symbol of devotion destroyed by ambition. Lau became the man who mistook success for salvation. And when people asked why he never married her, the answer was painfully simple: because power doesn't share its throne. In the glittering chaos of Hong Kong's elite, where every smile was a transaction and every promise a contract, Lau Luen-hung and Li Chi-chi became a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. She had given everything: her youth, her faith, her home, her health, believing that love could outlast ambition. He had spent millions, convinced that money could define devotion. Both were wrong. Theirs was not just a breakup, it was a collision between two currencies, love and power. And in the end, only one survived. Li died quietly, far from the lights she once stood beneath, remembered by those who knew her as the woman who loved past reason. Lau remained in the public eye, polished, untouchable, surrounded by luxury, yet haunted by absence. For all his wealth, He could never buy back the one thing she gave freely, sincerity. And as the years passed, his story became less about empire and more about emptiness, a reminder that affection can't be traded and loyalty can't be bought. In the end, the question that began it all still lingers in the air. Why would a man spend millions on love and refuse to marry? Perhaps because to him, love was never meant to be shared, it was meant to be owned. And when ownership replaced intimacy, both of them lost. Money built his empire, love built her legacy, and neither survived the cost.